these folks don't have more sex or watch more porn than others. They just feel worse about it. And oftentimes it's because of morality, incongruency, religious conflict, shame. And, oftentimes they're having sex or, watching porn or masturbating in order to regulate those negative emotions associated with those activities.
Welcome. Today I have Heather McPherson. Heather is a licensed marriage and family therapist. She is an entrepreneur, the CEO and founder of the Sexual Health Alliance, which is where I got my certification, a premier education and certification provider for sexuality professionals. On top of that, she has founded the Respark Group, which is a national brand encompassing a group therapy practice, a nonprofit organization. She's licensed in Colorado, Washington, Texas, and she specializes in sexual health and relationships. And just to add a little more icing on the cake, she's been published in Playboy, she's been on CNN and Rolling Stone, she's an ASEX certified sex therapist. I could go on our entire conversation just about her credentials. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you so much for having me.
I have been chasing Heather for a while, so I'm very excited that she actually gets squeezing me in her very, very busy schedule. So I'm going to go right into actually the topics that I wanted to talk about with you, which is to start with sex addiction, because it's like a real conversation. And I think I have learned so much about it. And I will tell you that my first sort of experience with learning about it was I was dating someone who was fresh out of a relationship where his wife had accused him of sex addiction because he was watching porn and actually made him go to Sex Addicts Anonymous. And he told me this, and I was just floored. Before I started doing this work, and I'm like, what are you talking about? I said, like, how much what were you doing? And he said, I don't know, I was like masturbating 2 or 3 times a day. And I'm like, something is wrong with this picture. But I know you'll have a lot to say about this, but I really think it is a topic that goes like way beyond just like, oh yeah, I'm a sex addict, where we kind of use it lightly.
It's a term, sex addiction. It's a term that was basically born after the DSM, our Diagnostic Statistical Manual for clinicians and therapists and psychologists, after they removed the diagnosis homosexuality. So after they removed homosexuality, and in the 80s, when there was a lot of fear around the AIDS crisis, in response to that fear, sex addiction was born, and the diagnosis was born. And it's largely a Western cultural diagnosis. And it's interesting because with my organization, Sexual Health Alliance, and the work that we do and the people that we partner with and our faculty advisory board members, we really do a lot of advocacy and education surrounding the diagnosis and the treatment methods, because they largely are harmful and prevent and do more harm than good and are not backed by scientific research. And there's lots of things within that. So I can kind of attest in terms of our group practice with Respark. We have 20 plus therapists that work with us, and we have a lot of clients that come in that have been diagnosed with sex addiction, or their partner says they're a sex addict, which is really common. And some of them have went through sex addiction treatment, and they come in, thinking that they have to refrain from any sexual activity, that there's a lot of shame involved, and they failed and they're bad people because of it. And it's the same with professionals that are getting trained through Sexual Health Alliance. In our cultural and our social media and the media at large, there's so many celebrities that have been diagnosed with sex addiction or taken on that label and go to treatment, and then they come out and they're cured, right?
Right.
And again, the research isn't there to back it up. The science isn't there. Even the MRI and brain research and everything that they've done, all the research that has happened in the last basically decade, supports that this is not a real diagnosis and it's actually causing more harm than good. And I was lucky enough to help help write a position statement that now ASAC and APA, support basically, and of course Sexual Health Alliance, that the sex addiction is hurting our clients, and it's really a diagnosis and a treatment protocol that kind of sets you back, I feel like, because again, you have to abstain. It teaches that, oftentimes if you have any gay or bisexual tendencies, those are pathologized, much less any other, non-heterosexual activity or anything outside the quote unquote norm. All those activities are pathologized, and it's to the detriment of our patients and our clients' health.
So what would define as sex addiction, and maybe start with what the former definition or the definition that one thinks of in a sort of a more generic sense, and then what you would actually define as sex addiction? And I also want to qualify, I find the word sex and porn addiction interchangeable, which I don't know that that's actually accurate. So yeah, two questions.
I mean, sex addiction, whenever we talk about it, it's oftentimes whenever other people feel like you're having more sex than you should. And it's the same as porn addiction. Porn addiction is sometimes when you're watching any porn, or more than what other people think should be happening, then it's, you can easily slap on a label for it. So in short, these folks don't have more sex or watch more porn than others. They just feel worse about it. And oftentimes it's because of morality, incongruency, religious conflict, shame. And, oftentimes they're having sex or, watching porn or masturbating in order to regulate those negative emotions associated with those activities. So we kind of support the idea that it's really about the function and the role of sex and porn and life and sexuality of that individual patient or client, not the porn or sex itself. So it's about the person, not the activity. So, we, Sexual Health Alliance, ASAC, the American Association for Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists, the APA, all of these organizations have now position statements that doesn't support the treatment of sex addiction or porn addiction. And instead, we advocate for a science-based harm reduction, evidence-based model that provides education, that provides shame reduction, and helps, destigmatize, what they've been told or what they've learned on the internet or through media. Because again, oftentimes when people come in with these diagnoses, or they take a quiz online, there's quizzes that you take a quiz and you check the boxes of yeah, I'm open to that, I'm open to that, and then all of a sudden you're labeled
Right.
sex addiction or porn addiction, porn addict. And so whenever we are able to, go through the six principles of sexual health and give education and provide some, a different model, which sometimes is called out of control sexual behavior or problem sexual behavior treatment. When we're able to provide a different lens to look at sexuality through, oftentimes we see really, a whole lot better and less harmful results where people are more accepting of themselves and accepting of their relationship style and love type and their own sexual health. So, it's interesting because a lot of the studies and the research has shown that it's like 90 to 95% of sex addicts are males. And like half of those males, I think, are white, heterosexual, religious, often Christian. There's high rates of Mormon, married males that are, middle to upper class income because they have to afford that sex addiction treatment. Um, so, it raises a lot of issues of, there's a lot of concerns about religion and actually religion therapists diagnose these individuals at a higher rate than non-religious therapists too. And so it really, I feel like it really comes back to a lot of education and harm reduction strategies that helps them accept their sexuality and the way they love, who they love. So it's really important concepts.
How does it differ? You said, the brain research, like how does it differ and when is it problematic as compared to being addicted to drugs or alcohol or other substances?
Yeah, so I'm not a neuroscientist, so I will not pretend to understand and go through all the, studies and MRI results and everything like that. Um, but what I do know is that whenever people are having trouble with their own sexuality, or their relationship with porn, they tend to struggle with it and feel shame about it. And it really doesn't have to do with the amount that they're having. So we have a lot of clients that, maybe they're self-pleasuring once a day or three times a day or once a week. In every single case, whether it's once a week or once a month or three times a day, they're all labeling themselves as sex addict or porn addicts. And oftentimes it's because the partner labeled them or a previous therapist or the internet.
Right, right,
The lovely quizzes online. And so, whenever we see someone that legitimately has a concern, maybe they do have out of control sexual behavior or compulsive sexuality, where they feel like they're out of control about their life and their sexual decision making. Oftentimes, it indicates that there's sometimes compulsivity issues, sometimes regulatory issues, where regulation issues. So they're having trouble regulating intense emotions, and instead, some people will go and run or go, watch TV or binge TV watch. And these folks sometimes go and have a lot of sex or watch a lot of porn and do that instead. And so whenever we see patients and clients that are kind of having those just different decision outcomes per se, we talk about, general sexual health, their approach to sexuality. And oftentimes it's the amount of shame, again, religion, morality, incongruence that leads them to engage in these behaviors without any type of thought sometimes or decision-making process system sometimes, where they're not thinking through the consequences. And so, that's why I mentioned principles of sexual health can be really important because then, you help teach that, we need to look at is this, are these behaviors honest? Are you being honest with yourself and others? Are you thinking about protection? Are you thinking about safety as well as pleasure, right? Of course. But some of these other processes that sometimes people go through in terms of, is this going to get me into trouble later? Sometimes that just isn't registering. And so we kind of slow down that decision-making process. And in other cases, sometimes we just add in other coping mechanisms. Sometimes it's adding in, other things that they can do to self-regulate and to self-soothe. So we're not saying don't do any of this stuff. We're saying let's add in some other healthy decision-making processes and coping mechanisms that help them feel better in that moment. Because again, the goal isn't to stop or reduce, the behavior. Sometimes there is the need to reduce if there's compulsivity, but oftentimes the goal isn't to stop or abstain from the behavior, because oftentimes whenever you say stop, they just,
right.
that doesn't work either. So we want to add in other behaviors that are healthy and approach it from that lens.
You mentioned the six principles of sexual health, if you don't mind, just for the audience, reiterating what those actually are.
Yeah, so let me see if I can get to it.
I should
So
know
there's
this. I'm the educator too,
yeah,
right?
yeah, I know. You
I
gotta
knew
help
you were
me
going
out
to
here.
test me.
You're testing me. I should be testing you. What's happening? It's free from exploitation, pleasure, honesty, mutual consent, free from STIs and STDs. And was that six? That might have been six.
Five,
There
but
might be one
I'll
more.
look up the sixth one. We may be here a while.
Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
like with Dr. David Lay, when we always quiz him, he would never get that sixth one.
Yeah, right. And he's like probably came up with them, right?
No, so actually they're the World Health Organization, Six Principles of Sexual Health. So it's even, bigger in terms of just health in general of how we approach sexuality.
When you're dealing with couples who are or individuals who are in whatever, whether they're not diagnosed, but they're saying they're sex addicts or you're helping them with this behavior, are you often treating couples? Are you trying to help the other couple, the other partner sort of change their perspective as well? Or is it just typically individuals that come in and say, this is what I am or how I feel?
The large majority are individuals that come in and their partner, typically wife, says, go fix yourself. Go fix this, which is difficult because I think that whenever you go through this process with the individual patient, we hope there's a lot of growth and a lot of learning and progress that's being made. And it's difficult whenever the other partner isn't in the room or isn't on that journey alongside with them. Because again, it's kind of, I'm a marriage and family therapist first and foremost, so I come from the background of systems theory. And so when the system, has these beliefs and rigidity and values around sexual health, and you have one person in the room, unless you're teaching them as well, which we try to, go home and have these conversations with your partner, talk to them about what you're learning, talk to them about, this journey that you're on and this self-discovery that you're having and how much you're learning in therapy. But oftentimes, if the partner's not in the room or the partner's not willing, or if they've diagnosed this, their partner,
Right.
and sometimes it's because they've gotten in trouble, they've committed infidelity, and this is like, oh, well, it's because they're a sex addict, so go fix yourself, right?
Hmm.
Or, we have group practice, obviously, Texas, Colorado, and Washington. I'm licensed in Texas and Colorado only. I just wanted to clarify that. So I'm not saying I'm licensed in Washington. But or you have clients in the Bible Belt, right? And they're unwilling to kind of look at the beliefs and the values that got them to this place. And I think that there's so much integration that could be done within spirituality, religion, sexuality, and I don't believe they should be separate or have to be separate, but oftentimes there's a lot of values that are associated with it and religious beliefs associated with it that say basically you shouldn't be self-pleasuring yourself, and any self-pleasuring is bad and is cheating on the relationship. We definitely have couples and clients that come in with those concerns and those issues, and ultimately it's up to the couple to decide what their boundaries are and what their agreement is. But oftentimes people make agreements that they're not really able to keep. And that's where we get into trouble. We go, oh no, I won't do that. No,
Right.
I'm not going to do it. It's bad. And then they can't keep them, and then they've broken the agreement, and that is a breach of trust. And so that becomes really difficult.
How do you integrate into religion when people, I mean, how do you bring those two,
Yeah, I
directions
mean, we
together?
definitely have a lot of clients that, especially in Texas, especially in the Bible Belt, even in Colorado and in other states as well. But just from my experience with our group practice, we definitely have clients that have strong beliefs and spirituality that's a part of their life. And I think our goal isn't to say that that's bad or wrong. Our goal is to figure out how do you integrate those beliefs and values into your view and your, kind of mission statement of what sexual health is, right? I mean, obviously, couples, in order to have children, they have to have sex. Ideally, you want it to be pleasurable, right? And so there's parts of it where, you're not allowed to talk about it or you're not allowed to do certain things. And it just depends on, your family values, where you grew up in terms of what was okay and what's not okay. And so oftentimes we help clients and patients evaluate, like, where did we learn these lessons? Are those lessons, are those rules rules that were just kind of put on you or rules that you really want for your life. These values are really important for my life, and I want to integrate them into my relationship and into my relationship with sex. And that's a different story, right? If you have these beliefs and values and you want to integrate them versus I grew up with these rules and that's just what it is. And, I don't want them, but then I just feel shame whenever I have sex or whenever I'm engaging in pleasure or whatnot. I feel bad. I feel guilty. I feel shameful with any of it, which is often what happens.
If you're enjoying the show and would like to get more information about spicing up your sex life, learning about menopause, and many more topics to help you grow and become more sex positive, why not hit the subscribe button to make sure you're notified every time a new episode comes out? Now, let's get back to the show. How do you deal with someone who says, the Bible says you're not supposed to masturbate, and I am Jewish and I'm like the least religious person in the world. So I'm just saying what I've heard about the book. Like I haven't read the Bible, and saying that masturbation is actually okay and healthy. How do you reconcile?
Yeah, I mean, oftentimes it's helpful to take kind of like a biosocial perspective around sexual health. And, for people that have values around, self-pleasure and masturbation that make it to where it's not okay and you shouldn't be doing it. We examine like where did that come from? Where did we learn that that's okay, not okay? And then also, gain permission, ask permission of, can we provide another alternative view? Would you be open to hearing that? Because, oftentimes they haven't been taught that this is not only emotional and physical pleasure, but it can be like physical health pleasure too, right? I mean, of course, learning about your body helps whenever you have sex with a partner, right? When you know what turns you on and what feels good, and you can teach your partner, what that is, because every body is different, every person is different, and so it's really helpful to understand that about yourself and not have shame around how your body looks, which oftentimes can happen. But yeah, I mean, I think that helping offering education around the physical health benefits, the medical health benefits, the emotional health benefits, the relationship health
Right.
benefits, and just offering a different lens to look at it through can be helpful. But I think that there are healthy couples that maybe only self-pleasure with their partner right there with them, and it just depends on how often and how much and what that looks like and if that feels good. And if you don't want to have solo pleasure, that is an individual choice. But I think in general, learning about your body is really important.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a whole other conversation on
Yeah.
sex education. You mentioned just before that there many more men identify or self-identify or accused of being sex addicts. Do you think that women just are quieter about it, or you think they don't act upon impulse the same way because of societal shame, or
There could be some of it, but I think I think it's largely just a societal norm in diagnosis that it's common to see men have this diagnosis. It's common for them to go to rehab and get treatment for it. And I think that, it's more accepted for men to masturbate or have self-pleasure than women. And so perhaps they're entering their sexual debut stage at a different point, a different level of awareness or of acceptance with themselves.
interesting, interesting. I will switch gears a little bit, but is there anything I haven't asked you that with regards to sex addiction that would be really
I
important
mean,
for the audience
yeah.
to
Oh, I'm
understand?
sure there's so much. There's so many. There's so many resources and interviews that I've done with the actual experts. I don't claim to be an expert, but with the actual experts that have done the research and Dr. David Lay and Michael Vigorito, who run the Problem Sexual Behavior Certification Program for the Sexual Health Alliance. And there's a lot of interviews on sexualhealthalliance.com that go through the progression of this diagnosis and alternative treatments to it, as well as on respark.co and resources and help there. I mean, I think that the interesting part, we for Sexual Health Alliance, we've had therapists come into the certification programs that are formally CSAT, Certified Sex Addiction Therapists,
Oh,
or
interesting.
have been through that whole entire program, and they tell us a lot about what's taught and what's not taught, and the interesting differences and in some of the narratives that are shared. And what's interesting is that, for the majority of those programs, they don't actually even talk about sexuality or sexual health. It's really addiction model based. So
Interesting.
there's not even a lot of education around sexuality and sex therapy, which, makes sense. I mean, I hope they don't provide education around sex therapy if they're not a certified sex therapist and they don't
Right.
actually have the training to talk about sex, right? But it is largely addiction based and rooted in, shame. And, if you are anything other than a heterosexual person practicing missionary position, um, then that is not okay, and you need to go get treatment for it.
Yeah, so many issues that people think are dysfunction and they're really just different, right? So let's go for a second to the Sexual Health Alliance. And I certified as a sex educator and just we talk about yay. We talk about sex therapists and then there's this sort of in between with the counselors and coaches, and I'd love to address a little about what each one does. But from a sex therapist point of view, how important is it to when you're in therapy for some sexual issue, how important is it to be going to someone who identifies as a sex therapist or not just identifies, sorry, let me qualify that, so is certified as a sex therapist versus like, shouldn't every therapist know about sex?
It's really, really interesting. So whenever I came into the field, gosh, it was like 15 plus years ago. Not very many people identified as a sex therapist or even a sex positive therapist. It felt pretty new. And I even started in a progressive city in Austin, Texas.
Mhm.
And I think there was only one other certified sex therapist at that time. That was it.
Interesting. Yeah, you put progressive and Texas in the same sentence, but maybe Austin is its own.
I mean, who knows recently, but
Yeah, sorry,
that's the
I
roots.
digress.
That's the roots of Austin.
Yes.
But yeah, there was only one other sex therapist in the city, and it was really difficult to find mentors and to get training and to understand that path. And very, very, very few people identified as like a sex positive therapist. That was kind of new too. Now I feel like lots of people identify as sex therapists or sex positive therapists, and it's really difficult to know if they've had any kind of training or what kind of training, right? Because again, it depends on who you're training from,
Right. Right.
and who you're learning from, because that can really influence your work, of course, right? So whenever I started the process, I sought out trainings and realized that there just wasn't enough resources. And so that's where we started Sexual Health Alliance. But we've made a lot of progress, which is really great. There's a lot of people that now do have training and are certified sex therapists. And I always try to educate clients and patients and other therapists, because it's still not known that certified sex therapists go through, very rigorous training requirements to gain a certification. And you want to make sure you know where that certification is from, right? Because now there's other organizations that provide certifications, and sometimes they're only 18 hours, and
Wow.
you're all of a sudden an informed sex therapist, which I don't really know what that means. Versus, Sexual Health Alliance, we have 300 hours of training, and I think ASECT only requires 150 hours of training, and there's specific categories and amount of hours that you need in each category. And with Sexual Health Alliance, whenever we put together the curriculum, whenever I put it together, I kind of said to myself, there aren't enough therapists that have varied experience and varied training, specifically in alternative relationships, BDSM, kink, non-monogamy, or sex addiction / problem sexual behavior, out of control sexual behavior. There wasn't enough emphasis put on those categories. And I think that, in our day and age, that's becoming, all those categories are becoming much more common, much more accepted. And there's kind of outdated curriculum, well-intentioned, but don't have the rigor and the requirements to have some of these more specific trainings that are evidence-based, research-based, that are from the world's experts, which are all the things that we require of every course and program with Sexual Health Alliance.
And what I was wowed by is that the people that are teaching it are actually practicing it. I mean, some of the sex workers and every, people who talk about it, which kind of leads me to another question. Do you need to be a practicing an alternative lifestyle to be a good therapist at that?
No, no. So I don't think so at all. Now, alternatively, it's really interesting because I hear a lot of people, coaches, therapists, etc., that, well, I'm in that lifestyle, so I'm qualified to to work with
I have
them. And I'm
sex, so
kind
I
of
can be
like,
a sex therapist, right?
oh no, right? Exactly. Thank you. I love
That's like
that
the
saying,
coaching
right?
world. Yes, I've had life,
Yeah.
so I could be a life coach. Yes.
Exactly. So the same principle applies, right, to any kind of specialty that you have. It's so important to get, intensive training from people who are doing it and from a wide variety of experts too. A lot of programs just have one or two people teaching the program. And I think it's really important to hear from a lot of different perspectives and voices. And yeah, I mean, people that are, maybe kink aware or consensual non-monogamy aware or friendly. I think of the friendly ones as like, oh, I have friends that do it. So I know what it is.
Right.
And I don't feel like you're qualified to provide that type of treatment whenever you haven't really read the research and you haven't done the work to understand, what makes these relationships successful, what makes them work long term, and what are some of the guidelines and some of the questions to ask and to work through whenever you're guiding a couple maybe to trying some of those activities, or oftentimes it's blown up in their face, and there's a lot of pain and hurt involved, and how do you address that, and oftentimes the biggest problem we see at Respark is that we have clients coming to us that went to a therapist that wasn't trained, and they said, oh, well, your relationship is in trouble because you engaged in some of these other activities, because you did kink, or because you're in an open relationship, or because you're swinging. And so they pathologized again the behavior and said, well, that's the problem. When we know that there's tons of people and couples and relationships that do this very successfully, that do it in a way that works really well for them long term for decades. So we have that research. We
Right.
know that it could be done. But they've unfortunately been told by previous therapists or coaches that the problem is the behavior or the relationship type versus not having education surrounding some of these issues and not having good research and good strategies to help them.
And I think that was one of the biggest takeaways I think I got from the program, was that teaching me that anything goes as long as people are consenting and nobody's getting hurt and everybody's doing, and it doesn't always go the right way, which is why we need people to help us. But just because somebody practices differently than you, or lives differently than you, or presents to the world differently than you, doesn't mean there's anything wrong with them. And that's a really hard thing to teach the world.
It is. It
I'm
is.
learning it now, and people are constantly asking me, like, what does it mean to be like poly or open, or what is it like, as and then I had a guy that I was dating think that I must be practicing all these things because I'm talking about them.
Oh
So
yeah, because you're a sex coach, right? You're
yep,
educating,
yep,
so of
yep,
course you're yeah.
yep, you must be out there. Yes, yes.
Uh-huh.
And just quickly, the difference between the coach, well, an educator, obviously, I'm educating a coach, counselor, or therapist.
So, to become a certified sex therapist with Sexual Health Alliance, you have to have a state license. So, you have to be licensed by the state in mental health or psychology. You could be a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a mental health nurse practitioner, or a marriage and family therapist, professional counselor, social worker, etc. For a sexuality counselor, those are typically professionals that work in clinic settings or in medical settings, sometimes even pastoral settings. So they only require a bachelor's degree. And if I won't test you, but if you're using the implicit model, which is something we teach in our program, the last part of that is intensive therapy. And so those counselors don't practice intensive therapy, but they provide permission-based, limited information, specific suggestions, which is the first part of implicit. And they're able to give education and help clients, patients, depending on the setting, and provide counseling. Sex coaching, so a sex coach and consultant or sex and relationship coach that's certified with us can provide coaching independently with individuals or couples or groups or workshops, and they provide again everything except the intensive therapy part because they're not licensed therapists. So it's important to know when to refer out whenever there's more issues or concerns that would require intensive therapy. Sex educator typically are educating people, the public, schools, doing workshops, providing maybe they're running courses, maybe they're doing podcasts where they're providing sex education and information around sexual health. And I think that's it. Is that it?
Yeah, I
Obviously,
think
we
you got
have
it.
yeah, obviously we have like couples and sex therapists, which is our dual certification, which provides more of couples and some marriage therapy pieces and relationship issues, encompassing more than two relationships, open poly swinger relationships, as well as traditional relationships and the issues the couples face and how to help them.
Great. I love it. I love it. This is great. Anything else you want to add about the program, the school, before I go to my last question?
Yeah, I mean, it's really wild. Whenever we started Sexual Health Alliance in 2015, so we're coming up on our 10-year
Yay, can't wait
anniversary.
for next year.
Yeah, it's gonna be super fun. It's gonna be great. Whenever we first started the organization, my goal was to provide a space that was inclusive and had all different types of professionals. And, it was not only therapists, but it was also educators, counselors, coaches, medical providers, touch professionals, all the different types of people, anyone who's talking to someone about sex or sexual health or sexuality. I want them all in the room. I want them all learning from each other because I feel like whenever we learn from each other, we do a whole lot better in all things. And so that was really important to me. And now, seeing it evolve and seeing it kind of grow, it's kind of its own beast, and I'm just kind of like directing the ship, in a way. That's kind of how I feel. It's amazing to see how many people are a part of it now and how much the community remains such an important central piece of the organization. And we have students from, we just looked at this yesterday, 67 countries, which is
Wow.
old.
That's
Yeah,
amazing.
this blows
Congrats.
my
That's
mind.
amazing.
It
Wow.
really blows my mind. So that's really, really cool. And speaking of countries, we're going to, study abroad with Dr. Justin Lammerler in
Love
four
it.
different countries this next year, which I'm super excited about. So yeah, it's really cool to see it evolve. But really the most important thing to me is the community and how, people like you find other professionals and don't feel alone and can learn from each other and support each other.
Yeah.
And that's so valuable to me.
And I really have to say, like, that was one of the things that surprised me, also, is how welcoming and open whoever I speak to is like, let me introduce you to the, and there's not that feeling of competition. I worked in New York City as a divorce coach for 5 years,
Oh,
and I'm a helper. Like, I am here to help. The competitive,
oh, I bet.
everybody's like, well, you're going to take business from me. And I just think we all are towards this common goal of sex positivity and education. And it really, you really feel it. I mean, the conference, but even ASAC, it was very similar to just a very, very open and welcoming feeling. So I love being part of this community, and I haven't been around that long, but I intend this to be like, this is, my final career.
I mean, listen, we have a lot of work to do. There is plenty of work out there,
Yes,
so
yes,
like,
yes. More, even more now.
so yeah.
So last question. I didn't prep you for this one, but I'm hoping you can give a pretty good answer. It won't be too hard for you. What is Heather McPherson? What is your definition of sex?
Ooh. It's so
You don't have to
funny.
take up that much time.
It's so funny because it's something we ask in our courses in our program too, right? So we
Yep,
ask you, so now you're turning the camera around on
yep,
me, asking
yep.
me. I think it's anything that encompasses pleasure, anything that feels good. It's a very broad definition because, again, something that I'm constantly teaching my clients and patients is to expand the definition of sex because whenever we have a very limited, rigid view where sex is one activity, that's where we get into trouble. And so, whenever we can expand the definition and expand all the things that feel good to us, that are pleasurable, then it's like super fun.
Yes, indeed, indeed. Thank you, thank you. And where can people find you? And I'll put all this in, including the Plisset model, in the show notes.
Getting some education in,
There
right?
you go. Absolutely.
So sexualhealthalliance.com and then respark.co, respark.co.
Great, great. Thank you so much, Heather. So nice to see you.
Thank you so much. This is lovely.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, follow, and review the podcast wherever you listen. And go ahead and share it with a friend or a partner and make the world a more sex positive place.